We will now be hearing from the Reverend J. Randy Alexander Jr. He's rector of Emmanuel Church on the Hill in Alexandria in the Diocese of Virginia. We now move to trust, integrity, morale, supporting church communion and community. Describe how you would intentionally cultivate healthy relationships with clergy and laity at the diocesan and congregational levels. How would you support spiritual and emotional health for both?
I heard it said recently that the bishop's job is to love God and to love God's people. Now, I know it's far more complicated than that, but keeping that basic summary in mind would help us from going too far astray. It's all about relationship and putting out establishing, nurturing, setting forth a climate of pastoral care and interest, delight in God's people, and letting that affect everything that we do would be essential. And I was thinking about some ways that would be lived out as I've prayed about it. One way that's played out is the approach to visitations. Taking visitations to parishes and schools and chaplaincies deeply seriously, trying to avoid any sense of what I heard a bishop once call a drive-by visitation. Investing, ideally being present for all services, including the 8 o'clock, ideally. I realize that can't always happen, and I don't want to promise anything that couldn't always happen, but that would be the ideal, to spend time at the early service, the later service, or maybe 3 services, to have time to be at coffee hour and hear people's stories, maybe to lead a forum, to meet with the vestry, to meet with the clergy, particularly the rector, before the visitation, to have lunch together, to pray together, to ask some very important questions. What do you need from the diocese? What's God dreaming for you next? What's showing up in your prayer life? How's your family? How are your finances? What can we do together? What's life-giving for you right now that maybe you need to be sharing with some of the rest of us in the diocese? I think those are the kinds of conversations that would make this worth doing, frankly, and worthwhile. Some of it comes down to what I call just presence, the bishop being present and convening people, being present for clergy days, convening groups like the treasurers of the diocese, the wardens of the diocese, the rectors or vicars of the diocese, the assistant clergy of the diocese, the chaplains of the diocese, the clergy couples of the diocese, female clergy of the diocese, Hispanic clergy of the diocese, gay, lesbian, LGBTQ clergy of the diocese, spending time with those in the ordination process, those new to the diocese. Each time that the bishop does that, seeds are planted and relationships begin to grow. And as I prayed about this question, I've tried to remember all the bishops I've served in over all these years and what I wanted from them. I wanted them to know that they noticed me somehow. I wanted them to know, to be clear and to tell us, and particularly to tell my congregation, that our ministry mattered, that we were part of the body, and that the rest of the body was there for us when we needed them, that we're all in this together. In some ways, the bishop's called to be the chief cheerleader, I believe. Sort of, again, drawing on Paul, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of commendation, think on these things. I served under a bishop once who would make a phone call to clergy on their birthdays, or maybe send a card. I mean, those kinds of things would be worth looking at. I believe we could do a lot, economy of scale wise, what we could do together, because there'd be so many people involved. For instance, I've long dreamed of a diocese having a financial advisor on retainer that would be accessible and open to any of the clergy. And what really got me thinking about this was when my wife and I, sought out a financial advisor, and we were told, nice as he was, we were told, we can't really help you because you don't have enough money. We need to work with someone with more resources. Well, if you're dealing with a whole diocese, imagine what could be done without a whole lot of expense. But imagine that investment in the health and well-being of our clergy. I mean, I think that would go a long way. The diocese providing resources for sabbaticals and continuing education when clergy are coming up to those times. The bishop should reinforce some sort of a climate of accessibility and of responsiveness, meaning it's possible to get an answer, even across difference, across disagreement. In fact, I think the bishop needs to welcome a culture of feedback. The bishop needs to know what's working, what's not working. Imagine being in a job where people are afraid to tell you what's working and what's not. I mean, that's a recipe for madness, isn't it? Respectfully, with charity, of course, and loving Christian fellowship, what's working, what's not working, and to have those channels be very clear. Part of the developing relationships across the diocese is being very involved on the bishop's part around major transition points, around clergy retirement, around clergy funerals, around celebrations of new ministry. What a tender, pivotal time in the life of any parish that is. The bishop needs to be centrally involved in that and to just delight in it. Those are some of the ways I could envision tending that absolutely central aspect of relationship. And maybe the last thing I'd say is the bishop needs to thank people for their ministries regularly, repeatedly. When the bishop stands up to preach in a congregation or a school or a chaplaincy, likely the first word should be thank you. Thank you for who you are and what you do in God's name and for the rest of us. I think that goes a long way too. Sometimes bishops forget that.
Well, that's a tall order, since I'm only one person and there's 104 congregation. Lord knows how many clergy and laity, right? So that's a tall order. There's an organizational development theorist named Jack Gibb who talks about developing trust in organizations, and the bedrock of trust, or I think part of what you're talking about here, integrity, morale, trust. How do you build that? Is you start by building relationships. You start that by building on the sense of who belongs here. You belong here. You belong in this conversation and in this place, and you matter. That you can't really have effective communication. You really can't get work done together, set goals and priorities, and then actually be productive in work without the foundation of trust. And so kind of one of the other things about that is if you're having trouble somewhere in the system, like say communication isn't happening, you don't try to fix the communication, you go back down a level and you build trust. And kind of the takeaway on that is that when in doubt, build trust. And you build trust through relationships. I'm a highly relational person. I love nothing more than sitting with people and talking with them about what things that really matter to them and wanting to hear about those things. And so I think that there are ways to do that, possibly. I mean, part of that, it's like, kind of don't know till you get there, but like what the specifics look like. But I can imagine in my mind's eye, the bishop coadjutor position is coadjutor for 6 months. And so you sort of get a chance to be able to kind of sit in the seat without driving the vehicle for 6 months, or maybe co-piloting the vehicle, right? But I would love to spend that first part of my tenure as bishop in the Diocese of Maryland literally out and about and seeing and meeting as many people, laity, clergy, as I can, hosting gatherings just to let them get to know me and kind of how I tick and where my heart beats around my faith in Jesus and my love for this church, and my hopefulness about the future of the Episcopal Church. Maybe we could do that regionally. Maybe we could do that through a deanery structure. Maybe it's an informal cluster gatherings that aren't they're more geography based. You know, I was joking with the search committee during my interview that I've got a tent trailer. My wife and I love to camp, and you know, what if the bishop showed up in the parking lot on a Saturday night in the tent trailer, you know, and hosted a barbecue for, you know, the area, like, come on, let's hang out, let's eat, let's talk about what really matters. I think there are lots of ways to foster those conversations, but I think it's about being present, which means not making everybody come to you, but going to them. And I realize that that's a labor intensive enterprise, but that's how I feel. It's the only way that I can think to build community, to build trust. Why should you trust me as a leader? Why should you trust us as a diocesan staff? Is to build those relationships, to honor your word, to follow through on your commitments, to admit when you make mistakes. To do all of that is how you build trust. And I think that when you have a higher degree of trust, you also have a higher degree of integrity, and that morale goes up because people know that you're the real deal, that you're not just towing a party line or whatever the perceptions are of people sometimes in leadership. So, you know, I don't know any way to do any of that other than showing up, being as authentic as I can be, being the best me that I can be, and to do that widely and broadly with as many folks as possible. I mean, that really would be my approach. I think if we have healthy leaders, both lay and clergy, we have healthy congregations. And so I would imagine spending quite a bit of time with my brothers and sisters who are clergy in ministry, not because they're more important, but because they have positions of leadership. And an organization can only be as healthy as the leader. And so I think leadership development and spending time with clergy, really hearing them is very important. And I think that's part of how you build trust.
I love this question. Thank you. So there are 4 principles that I want to bring to how my bishop's office will run. And they are listen, reflect, convene, and resource. This is, I believe, the job of a bishop's office. And you're going to notice I keep saying bishop's office because many of us get confused and we'll call the bishop's office the diocese. But the bishop's office is not the diocese. The diocese is the congregations, the people. And the bishop's office, the role of that office is to resource those congregations. This is my deep belief. My only job as your bishop will be to resource congregations, will be to make sure that our congregations have what they need to meet the future that is coming very quickly. Developmentally, emotionally, spiritually, I want each congregation to be able to say, this is what the diocese has done for me. I just did it. This is what the bishop's office has done for me. So energy flows from the bishop's office into our congregations more than it does the other way around. So listening, my job will be to listen to you and to be changed by what I hear. I believe trust begins with listening and being able to speak the truth to each other. So reflecting means that I and my office will reflect back to you what we hear. We're going to process stuff together with transparency. That might take some time, but time is how you build trust. Relationships don't start always in a trusting place, and they don't have to. Nobody has to trust their bishop. That's something that is earned. And convening, this is how we start to build trust between congregations that maybe are very different from each other. I really think that one of the most powerful things a bishop's office can do is convene the diocese, bring the diocese together to share knowledge, to network at convention, but also clergy conferences and the College for Congregational Development, which I helped to start and found on the principle that churches can learn from each other, that priests and lay people can learn together and become a team and go back with that toolbox and expertise. And then resourcing. We can resource each other. There will need to be structures in place for this. And an example of a structure that I would like to implement, which we pioneered here in the Diocese of Olympia, is a mutual ministry agreement structure. A lot of us use the language of mutual ministry agreement. What we have been trying out here is that every year, each congregation sends in their mutual ministry goals, just 3 or 4 goals that they've generated for the year ahead, to the bishop's office. And the bishop reads that and then responds, writes a letter back, and includes, here are ways that the bishop's office staff can help you with these goals. Is your goal a new website? Our communications person will be in touch with you to help you with that. Is your goal resolving a long-held conflict? No worries. Our candidate for congregational development or one of our consultants will come and help you with that. Is financial stability one of the things you're working on? Let's talk to the finance office and see how we can resource you. That the bishop's office should be a trusted resource for every congregation in the diocese. They should feel known, and they should feel like if they've got an issue, we're here to help. That's our job. So I think we start there. I wrote a little bit in my essay question about transparency, openness, and communication, building a bishop's office and governance structure that is truly open to new people coming in. And it's clear that people know how to be involved in what we're doing, and communicating that reliably and clearly and on multiple channels, because folks hear things all kinds of ways. And then transparency, that was the other one. Being able for people to be able to see how things work. Don't have any conversations behind closed doors unless they have to be, for legal reasons, or to respect an individual's right to privacy. But that's my hope. That's the bishop's office that I want to build. I'll need your help. There'll be a thing we have to do together. And my hope is we'll have lots of time to work on it.
Thank you. Trust begins with deep listening. And when I say deep listening, what I mean is the ability to listen without agenda, without judgment, and without that formulating of my next thought in the works. Deep listening for me means believing people when they tell you their stories and experiences of their lives in the church. And I see this through doing one-on-one conversations, which are really important, through group conversations, because the character of dialogue is different when we're in a group and the Holy Spirit moves between different people. I even have this imagination of going to different regions in the Diocese of Maryland to gather with lay leaders and clergy to hear what God is up to in your midst, and to listen to the wisdom and curiosities that are already present here in the diocese. And I hear the bit about supporting the spiritual and emotional health of our clergy and lay leaders. I've seen in systems where spiritual and emotional health of lay leaders is supported by the leadership not only giving voice to those things, but also showing forth in their lives spiritual and emotional health. For me, what that looks like, as people get to know me, they'll see that I'm very dedicated to getting enough sleep. I think that that's important for my spiritual and emotional and physical health. I make sure I carve out time each day for prayer, not only in the morning or at night, but in the middle of the day. It's important for me to disconnect and connect with God in an intentional way. Part of my own spiritual and emotional health is also staying close to really good friends, who not only make me feel good and have fun, but also hold me accountable and help me be a better Christian and a better human being. And it's important for me, for my spiritual and emotional health, to move my body. So you may see me on long walks or showing up to clergy conference with a yoga mat over my shoulder. And I think the way we let this seep into the system and encourage this in a diocese is not only for a leader to model this, but also to support lay leaders and clergy in their own spiritual and emotional health, which may look very different than how I care for that in mine. I'm so glad you guys didn't phrase this question as how do we practice self-care together? Because when I hear the term self-care, I think that sounds great. It sounds to me like, maybe some aromatherapy. But it also makes me aware that self-care sometimes for folks can involve money that they don't have or time that they don't have. So I hope that we can take a creative, expansive approach to looking at what kind of restoration, relaxation, renewal that people need in this period of just exhaustion, and be able to support that in creative ways. And maybe a first step is by creating a culture of yay you, where we praise each other for setting good boundaries. When I call you up and say, will you chair this committee? And you say, no, thank you, I already have my plate full. We say, yay you, good job. You set a boundary. Or we hear somebody carving out some real intentional time on their day off. Yay you, go, good job.
Thank you.